No, this is not the Flight 93 election rush. Ben Howe at Red State and I have quite a bit in common. Species, nationality, sex, and ideology, and similar background, except that he's actually making a living from doing the same thing that I am, pro bono. Like me, when Ben Howe was in his mid-20s, long before he began a career talking politics or making videos and film, like I'm doing right now, or the video part anyway. For me, it's videos, podcasting, and blogging, but it's the same idea. There was one voice that seemed to say everything I was thinking. Remember when that used to be the case, ladies and gentlemen? Good times. Good times. Howe would tune in 11:10 a.m. in Charlotte, North Carolina. I would tune in at the time. It was 570 KVI AM Seattle. These days it's 770 KTTH Seattle, but same idea. Every day, for me it was at 9 o'clock. For Howe it was at noon. To hear the opening beat from My City Was Gone by the Pretenders. You know, do 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 na 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 dun 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 dun. You know how it goes. Everybody does by this time. And Rush Limbaugh's voice would boom through my car stereo or my home computer while I worked on the EIB network. Hell, where do you think HSR network came from for my podcasts? A hard starboard radio network. Where do you think my reference to myself as the poor man's Rush Limbaugh came from? Now that I think about that, I'm going to have to change that because Limbaugh and I have diverged over the past year and a half. Ben Howe was a Rush 24/7 subscriber. This is how you can tell that Ben Howe is younger than I am, because I remember Rush 24/7. I never subscribed to it because I wasn't that hooked, frankly. I mean, I haven't been able to listen to Limbaugh for years, long before Trump mania became a blight on the right. But Ben Howe he was a Rush 24/7 subscriber the day it became available, and downloaded the podcast religiously to his click wheel iPod. He called in a handful of times and was so excited to have gotten through that he ripped the exchange out of the MP3 from his podcast download and played it for his entire family. Again, that would have been a bit more enthusiasm than I had. But see, I'm not a joiner, so I don't tend to get starstruck. You know, like if I were to meet Robert Downey Jr. in Tony Stark persona, my first thought would be, oh, I thought he'd be taller. Even though I know that Robert Downey Jr. is about 5'9", about the same height as my son, actually, intern Gerhardt. But I wouldn't get starstruck. I don't get starstruck, because, I mean, reality is reality, and reality never seems to live up to high expectations, but always reaches and plumbs lower depths than low expectations. Welcome to reality, folks, or at least that's my reality. Ben Howe still drinks out of his Club Gitmo coffee mug. I did once get a Club Gitmo t-shirt, which, given how much I weighed at the time, helped me do a fair appreciation of a world record-setting pumpkin. But I seem to recall one time, I haven't worn it in years, because I seem to recall one time I was reaching in, doing something inside the oven, and I got it caught on something and it put a big rip in it, so it would just, I had to throw it out. That's happened to more than one of my shirts, not necessarily for that particular reason, but shirts wear out, and I can't say that the Club Gitmo polo shirt was the greatest quality. So take that for whatever implications you want to draw from it. Ben Howe still has the photo he took in front of the Kennedy compound in Nantucket with his Gitmo shirt on, and he beamed with pride that Rush's staff put it on the website. RushLimbaugh.com. He listened as Rush started the Adopt a Soldier program, where you could purchase a 1-year 24/7 subscription for our fighting men and women overseas, and he happily contributed. Even got an email from the soldier thanking him. That'd be kind of cool. Well, Ben Howe stopped listening to Rush several years ago. I stopped listening to Rush many years before that because I just didn't have the time. And, there's something about this, especially when your office is right next to that of your boss. And, bosses, generally speaking, they don't mind if you have, well, these days it's Spotify or the like, but they don't mind if you have something on in your office, as long as it's music and it's easy listening music. It's just background. It doesn't create distractions. Talking though, talk radio, any kind of talk radio, political talk, sports talk, gardening, whatever, that they tend to frown on that. So suffice it to say, given the nature of my former career in accounting, I just didn't have the opportunity to listen. I just didn't. So, been a long time, and it can be distracting at times depending upon what the host is talking about. As I'm sure you all are perfectly aware from being subscribers and listeners to my podcasts over the years. And that's the mark of a good host, how much you can distract the audience, right? Unfortunately, that was put to evil ends by Limbaugh over the past year and a half. And Howe says it right here. He stopped listening to Rush several years ago, mostly as a result of a busier life and having a job that he doesn't hate. Which, if I was getting paid for doing this kind of thing, I wouldn't hate it either. Not that I'll ever get paid for it. I mean, apart from an unlikely sequence of circumstances that even my fertile brain can't imagine. I mean, the one minuscule platform I had that gave me the slightest bit of hope for such an outcome, politicalpistachio.com, Constitution Radio, was taken away from me by the noted and very disappointing Trumplican known as Douglas V. Gibbs, who definitely is a target in this Never Trump Manifesto, penned by Ben Howe. I wish I'd penned it, because everything in here is just absolutely golden, spot on, right on target. I mean, this should be every true conservative, every constitutional originalist out there, including you, Doug. That's why I emailed you this piece. If you're already Never Trump, you go, yeah! If you're not, this should bring you back to Never Trump lines. It really should. If the outflow should not be going in the other direction. Mark Levin, Dennis Prager, Hugh Hewitt. Hugh Hewitt's a GOP party hack from years back anyway. But it should bring them streaming back to our side. Hop off the Trump train!
Come on! Nice and easy! Don't look down! That's it! You're doing fine!
But I still had the utmost respect for Limbaugh and everything he'd accomplished for conservatism. I expected, even as Trump began to rise, that Rush would side with the Republican nominee, but I expected him to give Trump the bad candidate treatment. That is to say, I didn't believe that he would really cheerlead for Trump because to me, Rush put conservatism ahead of republicanism. Always had. Presumably always would. That's always who he was. That's the basis of his success, going all the way back to August 1st, 1988. And before that at KFBK in Sacramento. I mean, that was why he was so influential to the views of millions of conservatives across the country. I figured he'd cheerlead the people surrounding Trump, perhaps, spend a lot of time attacking the left, talk about how great cuck Pence is, and so on. I mean, that's how he handled John McCain's nomination. I remember when Rush, who had spent years hating on McCain, referred to McCain as McBrilliant because of his decision to nominate Sarah Palin as his running mate. I cringed a little when he did that because I knew it was mental gymnastics. In other words, it was BS. But I understood why. And by that time, I knew how he was. He was a partisan guy who believed the Republican Party was the best party to be a part of. And that was okay, because when it came down to it, conservatism would always be more important than the party. But it has been said that you either die a hero or live long enough to become the villain. It's sad to see that Rush has taken the route of cheerleading Donald Trump all the way to the point of completely contradicting himself, lying to his listeners about it, and now taking aim at the very principled conservatives that used to be, the core of his audience for decades, and agreeing with the author of a widely read article that never Trumpers are, quote, the Washington Generals. Boy, is that a misapplication of that particular term. Here's the quote that Ben Howe's talking about. This is Limbaugh on his program earlier this week, maybe it was yesterday. And there's even a term for the conservative never-Trumpers. He calls them the Washington Generals. I wonder where he got that. That happens to be my term for our side, specifically the Republicans in Congress. I think I named them the Washington Generals, happy to be on the field, happy to wear the uniform, but supposed to lose and happy to do so. And now those many of those same Republicans in Congress, the GOP leadership, are, well, they're on the Trump train.
Come on! Nice and easy! Don't look down! That's it! You're doing fine!
Thus making Rush Limbaugh a bedfellow of those same Republicans in Congress, the same GOP leadership. Right alongside all those ex-Tea Partiers who threw aside their principles and hopped aboard that same doomed express, shall we say. But I mean, the ironies just compound upon each other. And that's what happens when rationality and reason and calm and logic and principles are just chucked out the window, and you just go mad with anger and emotion and just the whole thing. When you stop thinking and you start emoting, that way lies madness, and we're seeing madness right before our very eyes on a daily basis. See, this was what Limbaugh did on yesterday's show, as Caleb Howe pointed out in a post yesterday. The widely read article Limbaugh is quoting came from the Claremont Institute and is titled this fear-mongering just drives me nuts. The Flight 93 election. Here's a quote from the article. 2016 is the Flight 93 election. Charge the cockpit or die! Now, you may die anyway. You or the leader of your party may make it into the cockpit and not know how to fly or land the plane. There are no guarantees. Except one. If you don't try, death is certain. To compound the metaphor, a Hillary Clinton presidency is Russian roulette with a semi-automatic rifle. With Trump, at least you can spin the cylinder and take your chances. Close quote. This is supposed to be an argument for voting for Donald Trump. I mean, first of all, the metaphor doesn't even work. I mean, it doesn't even apply. Let me find it here. First of all, storming the cockpit caused Flight 93 to crash, killing all aboard. That suggests that electing Trump would be the unmitigated disaster we say it would be. Second, the hijackers were going to fly Flight 93 into the U.S. Capitol or the White House. Storming the cockpit was for the purpose not of saving the passengers' lives, but the lives in the hijackers' targets. Hillary Clinton is not a terrorist or a threat to anybody outside the plane, and she can't prey on any of the passengers unless the plane stays in level flight, safe and sound. The far better option would have been to keep the hijackers off Flight 93 in the first place, corresponding to not nominating Trump in the first place, because once the hijackers were aboard the plane, everybody on Flight 93 was doomed regardless. That is the relevant metaphor to Flight 93. I mean, and you can see why the metaphor is crap, I trust. The article itself isn't bad, other than that it is where have you heard this before? This is from the Groovy Art of Forgotten Favorites on the EIB network. It is a phony baloney, plastic banana, good time rock and roll straw man. Hell, it's the Burning Man of straw men. But I'm not just going to talk about what he got wrong, Limbaugh that is. I'm going to tell you what this election is really about. And why it's important, since the anonymous author of that article and even the great L. Rushbo seem too drunk with partisan blinders to have any clue what is actually happening. I've already laid some of this out in previous videos, but the straw men keep coming back because that's all Trumplicans have. They don't have any arguments for their guy. They just got to keep making stuff up, just like their Cheeto Jesus. And we're even starting to lose some of our Never Trump line. Mark Levin, Ben Tor, Kurt Schlichter, Dennis Prager, Hugh Hewitt. So I suppose it's time for a refresh of the Never Trump Manifesto. And let me tell you something, Trumplicans. All you Trumplicans who used to be Tea Partiers, your toes, if you give heed and careful rational thought to what I'm about to say, what Ben Howe penned this morning, your toes will curl so much that they will burst through your plantar fascia area, i.e. the top of your feet. I'd like to start by asking a very simple question that I've asked before. Have the last 20 years made it easier or harder to sell conservatism to the public? Did adding trillions to the deficit over the 2 terms of George W. Bush make it easier or harder to convince people conservatives and by extension Republicans are a fiscally responsible crew with budget-minded ideas? Now, you ex-Tea Partiers and Trumplican ranks, you know your toes are already curling because you were the ones who were endlessly bashing the Republicans back during the Bush years for being too spendthrift and you spent too much money. I mean, that's what motivated tidy righties to say, to take a walk on the GOP majority in the 2006 midterms and declare, we're going to teach the GOP a lesson, which turned out to be Barack Obama and Obamacare and Dodd-Frank and cap and trade and how that and red lines and the Iranian nuclear deal. How did that all turn out for you? But at least they were Republicans. Did cutting taxes without cutting spending make low-income earners believe that lowering taxes works for revitalizing an economy? Did creating the Department of Homeland Security instill trust in voters that Republicans are not about growing the size and scope of government? Did $800 billion in TARP loans, Troubled Asset Relief Program, and $100 billion more in auto bailouts under a Republican president, lame duck, but still, and Republicans in Congress, they were in the minority, so they couldn't stop any of this anyway, but a lot of them went along with it anyway, convince the average undecided voter that they can trust Republicans, that they can trust that Republicans care about the working families who struggle to keep their own doors open? That it's not about handing money to the wealthiest at the expense of the poorest? The examples are countless, endless. Every single year, every single Congress, every single POTUS, the story remains the same. Government grows, the economy bubbles up and bursts, and the have-nots bear the burden of the fallout from that bubble while the wealthiest are protected by the DC elite. Then they start creating programs and initiatives that put a bubble around the old bubble, and the problems get pressed into a can and kicked down the road. And through it all, Republicans are the ones that primarily take the negative heat for it, including from Tea Partiers incessantly the past few years. Many of the same Tea Partiers who tossed their principles overboard and followed after Donald Trump, the New York liberal con man, thus putting many of those same Tea Party purity, or your ideological purity fetishists on the same side as the GOP establishment, and all in thrall to a New York liberal Democrat con man. I tell you what, to be clear-eyed in 2016 is to behold a nightmare of mass psychosis, rampant raging irrationality, primitivism, tribalism, and what we still believe in, true conservatives, constitutional originalists still believe in, is so far out in the wilderness that it'll never find its way back. So why are the Republicans the ones that primarily take the heat for all this dismal litany? Well, go back to the rhetorical questions earlier in the video. You know the answer. GOP leaders run on one thing and do another. You Trump supporters who used to be Tea Partiers, you know this is true. And now you're on the establishment side. Say what you want about Democrats, but for the most part, they say they'll raise taxes and increase spending, and that's exactly what they do. I mean, I'm not accustomed to being the guy who rails against the establishment, but that's what I tell you. Trump has not left any of us unscathed. We are all of us in positions we never would have imagined that we'd be in, even a year ago. The difference is I know it, and I can appreciate it. I understand why we're all in these positions. It's you Trump supporters who don't get it. And you're the ones who've inflicted it on the rest of us. It drives a lot of conservatives nuts to hear, but the truth is, optics matter much more than people would like to admit. Politics is about persuasion. It is not about fight, fight, fight. Because the vast majority of the American electorate are, guess what, low information voters. So they must be led around by the nose. They have to have things spelled out for them. And they're not very smart, or at least they're not very informed. They don't think about politics the way we do, we political junkies. They don't give elections, they don't give politics a thought other than around election time every couple of years, or maybe even every 4 years when it's a presidential election year. So they don't think about this stuff, so they have to have it spoon-fed to them. They have to have it explained. As Ben Howe goes on to say here, instead of working on those optics or working on earning trust with the American people and explaining and selling ideas, you have to keep doing this. You have to keep, what does Douglas V. Gibbs claim to be trying to do for almost a decade now? Educating the public. You have to keep doing it because they don't retain it. Because they're not vigilant voters. Voters, the founding fathers said, what that woman, I forget her name, accosting Benjamin Franklin coming out of the Constitutional Convention, and she asked him, well, what have you given us, Dr. Franklin? A monarchy or a republic? And he said, a republic if you can keep it. And the only way to keep a republic is for voters to be informed and vigilant. And that's what voters in 2016 are most definitely not, the vast majority of them. So voters have to be educated. You have to keep explaining the same ideas over and over and over again. You have to keep selling the same ideas over and over and over again. That's just how it works. And optics is a part of that. Politics, the analogy is drawn all the time between war and politics. Politics is war by other means. War is politics by other means. War is the extension of politics, whatever. But the truth is, there is a critical difference between war and politics. War is, by definition, coercion, using force to impose your will on the other side. Politics is about persuasion. Fight, fight, fight may be cathartic, but it's not going to persuade people who aren't as informed as you and I are, and aren't persuaded and are not going to be persuaded by being yelled at and called names. And here's a clue. Don't call people names who might be persuaded. Those who can't be persuaded, who are the enemy, go ahead and call them names, because it's not going to change anything. It's not going to matter anyway, so you can feel good about yourself. But people who can be persuaded are not going to be persuaded by, thump, 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 finger in the chest, and being yelled at and told how stupid they are. And that's not persuasion. That's bullying. And it's what Trumplicans do, and try to inflict on Never Trump. Bullying us, manipulating us, trying to scare us with the Hillary Clinton scarecrow. I mean, they all just work feverishly. GOP, leadership, establishment, whatever. They all just work feverishly to ensure the next election is won by appealing to the same groups over and over, no matter how divisive they have to be to do it. To them, the next election is all that matters. You know, the most important election in our lifetime every 4 years. In other words, every election is the most important election in our lifetime until 4 years from now. The next election is all that matters until the one after that. Not fixing things, not changing things. Just get to the next election and pray you win and keep your job. In fact, Republicans became so accustomed to appealing to whatever group would stay loyal to them that they stopped caring at all about who it was or what they stood for. Could they count on their vote? Then by God, we want them in our big tent. It's never been, it's not about moving toward the center. It's about attracting the center toward us. Attracting the center rightward. That's what Ronald Reagan did. It's about optics. Ronald Reagan had great optics. Ronald Reagan was the greatest salesman and apostle and ambassador for conservatism in the White House that there has ever been. Why? Because one, he stood for conservative principles. B, he was never angry and abusive. And he never went around saying stupid shit. He was optimistic, he was upbeat, he was positive. And that was associated with conservative principles. That's why conservatism gained so much ground. More ground under Ronald Reagan than ever. I mean, before Ronald Reagan came along, that's not even a parsley sprig on the plate of the 9-course meal that was conservatism's advance under Ronald Reagan. If it wasn't for Ronald Reagan, there would never have been a Gingrich revolution. Conservatism would never have been mainstreamed, which was William F. Buckley's ultimate dream back in the 50s and 60s. I mean, if Trump were to win, conservatism would be all the way back to where it was back in the 50s and 60s. That's how far conservatism would fall out of the national political landscape. Because Donald Trump is not a conservative. He's not a Republican. He is a liberal Democrat con man. I mean, if Republicans thought they could up their chances of winning an election by getting the support of cannibalistic Ponzi schemers, you'd better believe they'd start saying Hannibal Lecter and Bernie Madoff were misunderstood. That's not anything remotely similar to a set of principles or ideals, though. It's just a win-at-all-cost obsession. Never mind what you're fighting for. Never mind what are you trying to win to put into place. Sounds an awful lot like Donald Trump, doesn't it? Just win, baby. Doesn't it matter what you're winning for? Doesn't it matter who and what ideas would benefit from that victory? You'd think it would for people who not too long ago were absolute conservative purity fetishists, but obviously not so much anymore. And throughout all this time, Republicans infected their base with that same manic urgency. Again, every election was do or die. Every election is 1776 reborn. I know this because I not only fell for it, I took part in spreading the idea. We all did. You remember 2004? I mean, we can't let John Kerry get in there. John Kerry's a traitor. John Kerry just sold out to the Viet Cong. He'd do the same thing with Al-Qaeda. And then what happened 4 years later? Someone a lot worse than John Kerry got into office, into power. You know, we've reached a point of hyperbole where people regularly tell me that this isn't Jasmia's echo syndrome. I mean, this could have been lifted straight from one of the last episodes of Constitution Radio on which I appeared, when I told Doug and Alex to their faces, to listen to you guys, you would think that Hillary Clinton made Satan look like Jesus Christ, for crying out loud. She's not that bad. I mean, how is it that Hillary Clinton being Barack Obama's third term is not bad enough? You gotta go out of her way to make her, oh, well, she's a communist, she's a this, she's a that. Oh, and I had Doug Gibbs and Alex Ferguson trying to tell me that Hillary Clinton would be much worse than Barack Obama. After what we had said about over the previous 7 years about Barack Obama, and now all of a sudden Hillary Clinton would be much worse. How does that work? Why the need to exaggerate? Because they were trying, and they still are, trying to rationalize their support for a man that they know they have no business supporting. So, obviously Ben Howe, echoing me today, he said, we have reached a point of hyperbole where people regularly tell me that Hillary Clinton is literally Satan. That in fact, if the actual source of all evil in the universe was running opposite Hillary, they'd vote for the Prince of Darkness, Beelzebub, Mephistopheles, Lucifer, the dragon. I had someone tell me that Hillary Clinton was Hitler and Pol Pot wrapped into one. That's given her body shape. Aesthetically, it might be possible, but I mean, that would be that we would be slaves by 2020. Well, if that's the case, why do you think she would wait that long to send us to the Alaska Gulag? Yeah, I talked about Barack Obama constructing the Alaska Gulag. It was hyperbole, and it was exaggeration to make a point. My apologies if anybody took it literally. And plus, you never knew with Barack Obama, but he can't even close Gitmo, so it was hyperbole. Our guns will be confiscated. We'll lose the Supreme Court for 50 years because she'll appoint 6 Supreme Court justices in just her first term. The Hillary Clinton scarecrow, in a nutshell. And you've heard me say over the last few, in some of the last few videos about how I am not going to live my life in constant fear. I've had enough of that. Fear, 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 and fear-mongering. And when you get enough of that crap from the left, and now to hear it coming from people who used to be on our own side, my limit has been reached. I refuse to live in fear. And I'm not going to let fear, which is another emotion, determine how I vote. The only thing that I am going to let determine my vote is what I believe, is principle, is constitutional originalist principle, and nothing else. And neither of these candidates make the grade. So, let us say something incredibly controversial, Ben Howe and myself. There are worse things than Hillary Clinton. Yeah, that's right, I said it, Mr. Levin. Now let me temper your frothing outrage which already pre-existed. This might have caused it to roll at a slightly higher boil, but nonetheless, with a less controversial comment on the panicked right. There are worse things than Donald Trump, too. For the love of God, of course I would vote for Donald Trump if Satan was running against him. But the fact that there are worse things than Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton is not proof on its own, nor is it an argument in favor of either one of them that either of them deserve your vote in this election. There is no positive reason to vote for either Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump. Especially if you listen to Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump. All they ever say is, he sucks. She's terrible. He's crazy. She's a crook. But where do you ever hear either of these candidates or their supporters make positive, proactive, uplifting, constructive arguments for their own candidates, their own candidacies? You don't see it, you don't hear it, because they do not exist. They don't exist. And of course, the biggest irony is that Donald Trump would ultimately, if he ever did get elected, would pursue an agenda pretty much indistinguishable from that of Hillary Clinton. I mean, at least Hillary's followers have a pretty good idea of what she would do in office. Trump supporters have no bleeping idea whatsoever. I mean, they are the dupes, the useful idiots, the ones who are being used to guarantee Hillary Clinton's election. They refuse to admit it. They refuse to acknowledge it. But someday, I'm not going to predict when. It may be on November 9th. It may be a month later. It may be 6 months later. It may be a year later. Sometime they will admit, or maybe they'll just conveniently have amnesia and will never admit it, but I'm going to be there to remind them, I'll tell you that much. And that's not because we aren't at a tipping point. Well, we were at a tipping point 4 years ago. We tipped the wrong way, and now we're in free fall, and it's just a question of when the end is going to come. But see, that's the thing. A lot of people predict. In fact, you look on YouTube. A lot of YouTube channels that have these, the videos about how, well, the U.S. currency is going to collapse on September 27th. There's a reason why the scriptures say with regard to the rapture, why Jesus Christ himself said, no one can know the day or hour, only the Father knows. Now, you can know the general time, but don't try to get it down to specifics. We know the country is headed for collapse. That was guaranteed and locked in the moment Barack Obama was reelected on November the 6th, 2012. The only question is when, but we don't know when. So we got to keep doing the best that we can. We can't give up like Trumplicans did when deciding to support Donald Trump. That was giving up. That was quitting. That was saying, well, if you can't beat him, join him. And Trump supporters are every bit as much the mind-numbed zombie cultists that Obamunists were in 2008. The only difference is Trumplicans' demigod isn't going to win, barring Hillary Clinton keeling over at one of the debates. So we're past the tipping point. It's not because a Hillary Clinton presidency or a Trumpedency wouldn't be disasters. They will be, or Hillary's will be and Trump's would be. It's because it is time to break this cycle. The cycle that has put our country in this imminent peril. How imminent, who knows? Let's just say peril. It's because it's time to break the cycle that put the country in this peril and stuck us with the two most hated and despised major party nominees in American political history, where we have nowhere to go but down, and nobody is pointing the way back up. Not out of some sense of tiredness or election fatigue. It is precisely because we are past the tipping point that the cycle must be broken, even empirically. We cannot be slaves to a 4-year election cycle any longer. We have to start looking at the bigger picture. What do we stand for? What can Trump supporters stand for again? We have reached a point where otherwise intelligent people are suggesting that if you don't vote for the narcissistic, power-mad, uncontrollable, authoritarian, spoiled, dictator wannabe, dangerous, non-conservative, blowhard liar, that the American Republic is dead. Of course, it died 4 years ago, but moving right along. We're being told that it's important to ignore your reservations, ignore your genuine concerns, toss your principles overboard, shut up and vote for a guy you legitimately are concerned isn't mentally stable or trustworthy with nuclear codes, because if you don't, the marriage of Adolf Hitler and Pol Pot is going to throw you in an internment camp, a concentration camp. Every 4 years, this hyperbole gets worse. It gets more strident, it gets more irrational, it gets more insane. It's emotional manipulation meant to cover, well, why should we vote for the Republican nominee? Why? What's the positive argument? And now the base is so whipped up into a frenzy, even as it's actually thrown its principles overboard, whipped up into a frenzy in support of a liberal Democrat conman, that it has legitimized and elevated some of the most paranoid, xenophobic, and if not racist, then at least ethnically fearful groups of Americans I've ever seen. They operate on fear and mistrust and often represent some of the most mindlessly obscene views you can imagine. I interact with these people every day, and many of them are now holding high positions within the Trump campaign or serving as surrogates on cable news. Destroying the Republican brand indefinitely. Embodying every left-wing stereotype of conservatives that they've ever vomited upon us. You realize, and Trump supporters essentially have said, yeah, we do stand for that. What about it? And they can't even really defend that, because they know that it's toxic, but they don't care anymore. That's why I say Trump supporters have given up. They have run up the white flag. They have capitulated completely to the other side. They have become the other side. Thing is, the alt-right is what Ben Howe's referring to. And they don't represent the majority of Americans. Trump supporters don't represent the majority of Americans, as the November 8th results will resoundingly demonstrate. Not by a long shot. Instead, they are just more and more coming to represent the Republican Party. What did I just say about destroying the GOP's brand indefinitely? And who's that going to help? It isn't going to be conservatives. It isn't going to be us. It's going to be the other side, which you have implicitly joined, Trump supporters. Instead, they are just more and more coming to represent the Republican Party until recently, the party and most conservatives at least attempted to ignore them, a timid form of enabling, in my opinion. But now they've installed a man who understands salesmanship better than most, but he's not selling what we believe in because he doesn't believe it himself. And he's been using this group the entire time to elevate his campaign. Well, elevate being a unique word. I don't think it quite applies in the conventional definition. The result is that the rest of the party is having to choose between embracing that madness for the sake of winning the next election or taking a stand, standing athwart the path of history, saying, "Stop! Enough!" Or, if you want the Klingon translation, "Marry up!" The irony of the article that Rush Limbaugh was citing is that he thinks we who are never Trump are the ones that think everything is fine and let's just get through the next election. No, no, 1,000 times no. Psychological projection again, which is traditionally been a character trait of the left. If you can't beat them, join them. It is Trump supporters, specifically the ones that have resigned themselves to him, Doug, that are doing this. They are essentially signaling to the American people that there is simply no line of decency, no expectation of principles, no standard of common sense that exceeds the desire to retain power. But power for what purpose? That's what principles do. They inform your reason for seeking it. Power is a means to an end, not power in and of itself. At least that's the way it's supposed to be. It's Trump supporters that are saying this is just another election because 4 years from now, you're going to be hearing the same shrieking. I mean, eventually, wouldn't you start figuring out that, well, Barack Obama was served a term and the country didn't, well, the country wasn't helped, God knows, but it didn't collapse, at least not yet. And then he was reelected, and here we are at the end of his second term. And the country's still here. It's not in great shape, but it's still here. And 4 years from now, after Hillary's been in office for a term, and you're going to hear the same rhetoric, oh, this is the most important election. Oh, shut up. Beyond a certain point, doesn't that become the snake oil itself? That's what Ben Howe was saying here. You know, since it is snake oil, since it is quite evidently hysterical BS, why don't we just return to first principles? Have some standards. Start moving the country back in the direction it's supposed to go. And the first step in that is to have candidates who actually believe in what we believe in. Not having to rationalize, not having to engage in willful self-delusion, not having to hold our noses until they're ripped completely off of the front of our skulls. Aren't you tired of settling? I mean, Donald Trump is the ultimate settling. Donald Trump is no better than Hillary Clinton. Donald Trump is cut from the same cloth as Hillary Clinton. I mean, aside from sex, gender that is, Donald Trump is Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton is Donald Trump is Hillary Clinton. Voting for one is the same as voting for the other. They're both corrupt. They're both liberal Democrats. They're both inveterate liars. Why be a part of that? Why be a part of your own personality cult? I thought we hated that kind of crap. I thought that was a left-wing trait. Now here it is in the Republican Party. If you can't beat them, join them, Trumplicans. Have you ever considered that the media is biased against Republicans because maybe, just maybe, Republicans ask for it, set themselves up for it? Because we don't even try to make a case that is palatable to the American people and instead choose to dog whistle to this type of scum we now find controlling the destiny of the party? That during an economic depression, our best answers involved going to poor areas and complaining that they don't pay enough taxes. That we respond to every single police shooting with the same uniformity as we claim Black Lives Matter does. That we applaud when a little girl is told her dad will be deported because it's not enough to simply have a position. We're for some reason required to be dicks about it. Or in other words, sound like Donald Trump. And of course, Donald Trump doesn't even believe in what he's sounding like a dick about. You know, the other day, a conservative activist actually mocked the idea to me of doing something that made Republicans look good on TV. Apparently, good optics are somehow selling out, when the truth is, Trump supporters are the ones who sold out their principles to follow after Donald Trump and his idea of his idea of political incorrectness, which is not being a dick, being an asshole. Where exactly is it that this person thinks voters go to form their opinion? This gets back into David French's piece from last week about how the rise of Fox News may have done critical damage to the conservative movement by ghettoizing conservative figures, conservative leaders, conservative opinion makers. We have our own little bubble, but the rest of the media, untouched, unscathed. We don't even go there. We don't. It's like a church that doesn't send out missionaries. I mean, you'll have great Sunday services, but what about the rest of the world? Didn't the Great Commission say, didn't Jesus himself in the Great Commission say, go out into all the world and make disciples of all nations, blessing them in the name, or baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit? Evangelism? Reaching the world for, I mean, doesn't that have a political application as well? And part of that is good optics, and part of that is persuasion. Looking good on TV does not mean sounding liberal. It means going on TV, pushing the conservative gospel, so to speak, but looking good doing it, being persuasive while doing it. It gets back to Ronald Reagan again. Ronald Reagan looked good on TV. Ronald Reagan was persuasive. Anybody going to stand here and say that he was a cuck? Oh, he signed amnesty. Everybody makes mistakes. But there's a difference between a mistake and the mistake defining you. That's the bridge too far, Trump supporters. That's why we are never Trump. Because your mistake defines you. I mean, I have a lot of tolerance. This is why I've never been an establishment basher. Because I have a lot of tolerance for candidates who are not perfect. You know, the vicious attacks on Marco Rubio, for example, during the primaries. I could have lived with Marco Rubio. Now, was his support of the Gang of Eight comprehensive immigration reform, Schumer-Rubio, was that a huge, grievous error? Of course it was. Nobody suggested any different. But it doesn't define him. It doesn't mean he's not on balance overall a conservative Republican. He is. He was also the most electable candidate in the GOP field. Obviously, electability was not a factor on either party in this election. Imperfection is permissible. Treachery is not, and that is what Trump supporters have engaged in. They are the Zimris, Joe. They are the Judas Iscariots. They're the ones who sold out their principles and the party and facilitated the hostile takeover of the Republican Party by the Democrat Party. That's why it's Trump supporters who are the cucks. Because they have willingly invited an enemy into the party, into their very midst, to sexually, metaphorically speaking, sexually assault everything that party has ever stood for, while cheering him on while he's doing it. This is more than just lying back and enjoying it. This is actively participating in it. I mean, that is the ultimate cucking. I mean, as I said before, do we want to be right and lose? Do we want to be wrong and lose? Or do we want to be right and win? And who was the last Republican leader to be right and win? Ronald Reagan. I know. Well, there'll never be another Reagan. Nobody's disputing that. You got to stop talking about Reagan. He's the past. We got to move forward. We got to go in the future. That's why you got to get on the Trump. Well, whatever. I'm not going to say it again. I mean, twice in one video for that cutaway is enough. But no. I mean, there will never be another Reagan, but that doesn't mean that his example can't be followed and emulated. That doesn't mean that Republicans can't nominate conservatives who are optimistic and uplifting and sunny and positive, good optics that will persuade or be more likely to persuade people. I'm a Reagan conservative. I've always been a Reagan conservative. I will always be a Reagan conservative. It's just grievously lamentable that majority of Republicans have forgotten what that means. Think they have to sell out, delude themselves into the tortured rationalizations that are mentally necessary to convince themselves to take that disreputable, dishonorable step. Again, how did TARP work out for us? How did the Department of Homeland Security work out for us? How did deficits work out for us? Do you believe that in 2020, if we embrace Trumpism, win or lose, that the American people will now, on top of everything else, believe we are compassionate? That we are inclusive? That we have the best interests of the country at heart? That we're honest, honorable, trustworthy? If not, how do you feel about our chances of winning the next election then? Or the next one? Or the one after that? Big picture, dear viewers. You're worried about losing the next Supreme Court nominees between 2016 and 2020. Well, how about losing them from 2016 to 2028? 2032? Time does pass on. There is a horizon beyond the next 4 years, after all. I mean, is that a better or worse scenario? This election is not a referendum on Hillary Clinton. I don't care if she wins. And it doesn't matter what I think because she's going to win regardless. Trump's nomination has made that inevitable. But it's as irrelevant as it is inevitable, primarily because we, as in conservatism, have already lost. Embracing what killed our chances takes us from mortally wounded to swinging from a tree branch. We gain nothing, and we lose everything. And the idea of a lost Supreme Court will be a relic of old thinking, as we can't even see what's over the horizon. We'll be so far out into the wilderness. That's what happens when you voluntarily torch your own brand. They'll think Trump doesn't know what he's doing by carrying out that torching to Trump supporters' wild, rabid cheers. That's what you burn down, Trumplicans. You burn down conservatism. Everything that you claimed to believe in at one time. I mean, if you truly believe that conservatism, not republicanism, is what saves America and helps her reverse course, then why would you even consider nominating and voting for someone that would destroy the opportunity for conservatism to advance, thus preventing it from being able to do those very things? All because the guys who have been in power for decades are now working with people that we generally despise and don't trust, and the two of them are, who, remember when they were enemies, supposedly? And the two of them are telling us the world is going to end if we lose this election? We being the GOP. You know what? Time to get outraged again, Trumplicans. The world is not going to end if the GOP loses, or hell, the world is not going to end when the GOP loses this election and Hillary Clinton becomes the 45th president of the United States. But we being conservatives, constitutional originalists, are going to lose. We already have. The only real question is if we lose with an opportunity to recover, to come back, fight again another day, or if we lose in a panic, embracing the worst parts of us as we go down. That's the difference between defeat and political suicide. I abhor that the author, Rush Limbaugh quoted, used a 9/11 metaphor to make his point, but I will now conclude by correcting it. Or Ben Howe did. I corrected it earlier. This is Ben Howe's version. Far from being comparable to running to the cockpit to try and save the day, what Rush and others are, and you too, Doug, are astoundingly asking us to do is to not rush the cabin at all. They're not suggesting we try to save the plane or even to force it down to prevent others from being harmed. Instead, they, Trump supporters, are asking us to sit quietly in our seats and trust that we can survive whatever the plane crashes into. To gamble that while we don't know what the terrorist intentions are, we do know that crashing causes death. Remember, the passengers on Flight 93 were doomed regardless. To gamble that while we don't know what the terrorist intentions are, we do know that crashing causes death, so let's go with the unknown. Besides, they've been on 100 flights and they feel really certain that they can go about business as usual like nothing is different. But everything is different. Those of us who recognize that will be tasked with rebuilding the destruction that Donald Trump has brought to the Republican Party. I'm guessing the rest will go work at Trump TV, I suppose. By the way, will Fox News even be in business eventually? Because, I mean, if Trump TV is going to get their talent, they got to pretty much gut Fox News, don't they? I mean, they've already brought over Roger Ailes. They've already brought over Greta Van Susteren. Sean Hannity will be over there. As for my former hero, well, never hero per se, but whatever, Rush Limbaugh, or how about my perhaps former friend Douglas V. Gibbs? I will always cherish who he was and hope he can be that person again. I'm praying that I wasn't simply wrong about him all this time and he was merely an entertainer with no real convictions. Yeah, if Rush happens to see this, my parting words are this. Count your blessings, Mr. Limbaugh. You never had to see your own conservative hero fall so far, so fast.